Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second edition of our Leadership Lessons Q&A event series. My name is Alex, and I'm the Growth Marketing Manager at OfferZen. Before we dive into the event and ask all the burning questions, we have some rules of engagement. If you have any questions, please drop them in the questions tab at any time. We'll make sure to cover them at the end with Kurt. The session is being recorded and you'll get the replay link post the event. So if you have any nuggets of wisdom that you might have missed, you'll get it in your inbox after. And the chat is open. Please use this to say hi, maybe share where you're joining from, drop a LinkedIn, and let's maybe see if that's working for now. So if you can just say hi. I got a yo. Awesome. And a yellow. I love it. It's great to see that that is working. Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to everyone that's just joined. My name is Alex, and I'm going to be hosting today's session. Cool. Just a few words about OfferZen. So OfferZen is a developer talent marketplace that was founded in Cape Town, South Africa in 2016. With OfferZen, companies don't just hire, they hire smarter. Choose to connect with top developers directly through our curated marketplace, or go premium with OfferZen Embedded, where a dedicated talent partner joins your team to handle the heavy lifting for you. If you are interested in any of our offerings or finding out more, you can just select on the screen, on the poll that should be on your screen now. There we go. Give that a second. Awesome. We'll be hosting a series of these events over the next few months, featuring tech leaders from top companies, both local and international. We'll be diving into real challenges, career-defining moments, and leadership lessons that have shaped these leaders' careers. That being said, today we're joined by Kruger, CTO at Antidote. Let's bring him on stage. Give him a few seconds. Cool. Hi, Kurt. How's it going?
Hi. It's nice and sunny here, but super chilly inside the house.
Good to hear, I guess. Hopefully after this, you can go out and enjoy some sun.
Definitely.
I think let's start with a brief introduction before we dive into the Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so for those I haven't met yet, I'm Kurt. I've been in the industry for just over 20 years now. Straight out of varsity, I actually wanted to be a game dev, and I had a job lined up with a company called Luma Arcade. I don't think they exist anymore, but I was meant to travel up to Joburg for that, and but then I met my now wife, decided to stay in Cape Town, and instead joined a small AI startup. After several years, the company shut down, and then I started moving around a lot, just looking for interesting, challenging problems to solve. Never really moved around for the money. But over time, I became more interested in kind of operational and people problems. And that's when I got a chance to move into a managerial role. And now I kind of fill CTO roles at scale-ups.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing a little bit of your background. I'm excited to unlock more of your journey in the session. Just to see on screen now quickly for the audience, we're going to have three themes that we're going to dive into. The first being kind of the journey from dev to leader. The second theme, the mess ups and the milestones experienced along the way. And then lastly, building and leading for the future. Again, questions for the audience. If you have any questions, please drop them in the questions tab and we'll tackle them at the end. Okay, let's dive in. Theme number one, the journey from dev to leader. Let's set the scene, looking back to where it all kind of began. You didn't start as a CTO. As you said, you kind of had this journey from being a developer to an engineering manager. I really want to explore this evolution, some of the personal moments, the challenges that you kind of faced along the way, and what it really meant to move from building software to actually then building teams. You've already spoke a little bit about the arc of your career. Maybe diving into that, can you share a moment or decision that really shifted your career path? Maybe something that pushed you a little bit more to leadership?
Yeah, I don't think it's one specific moment really. It's a kind of an accumulation of a number of events, right? I think I'm a pretty typical dev. For the longest time, I kept telling people I never want to climb the corporate ladder. I like working with computers. I don't like working with people, which is actually wrong because as a dev, you spend most of your time with people. And so as I was bouncing around all these different companies, I saw mostly the same issues. And I think the most telling one was when I was working for Jumo. This was many years ago. Thankfully, they are no longer the same company. They have evolved into something that I think is one of the healthier scale-ups locally. But the problems that I really saw at most of these companies that I worked at was that there was very little formal process, right? No clear roadmap. People didn't understand why they had to, do the things that they were asked to do every single day. And the other problem was that there's, I guess, too much telling and not enough showing. And what I mean by that is people in leadership roles tended to tell people what to do, as opposed to explaining the problem space and allowing people the freedom to explore solutions within that space. And so I guess when I arrived at Jumo, I decided to, try to be part of the solution as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And I specifically then asked to be considered for a lead role because it was something that the team was really missing. It's important to note that this didn't happen overnight. It started off as a conversation with my manager and the VP of engineering at the time. We spoke about the issues that the team was facing, the issues with the code and the product, and how we could potentially start fixing some of those things. And that really kickstarted two very long and at the same time short years of painful learnings, but also some really great friendships. So there's 4 gentlemen who unfortunately aren't on the call today. They're working abroad, but who I owe a lot of the progress that I've made to.
That's amazing. We can send them the recording and say that they were mentioned.
Definitely.
Maybe if you could look back to that time, if you could give your junior developer self one piece of advice, what would that be?
I was a very difficult junior. And so what I think the biggest issue that I've seen associate developers struggle with really is this need to want to progress as quickly as possible. But at the same time, they don't really know where they want to get to. They don't know why they want to get there, other than, it's more money and it's more power. And so it makes it very difficult for them to carve out a path for themselves to get there. And so if I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be to have these frank conversations with my manager, tell them what the end state is that I want to reach, but then also listen to what they're trying to tell me to understand and not to respond. Because often it's very difficult to bridge that gap if one party just isn't listening. And so once you have that understanding, and then really it is up to you to put in the work. And sometimes, I guess there's 2 caveats here. Is number one is that, the company might not be able to accommodate your growth. There might be people and operational issues. And so that really means that, like, as an associate dev, you also sometimes just need to be comfortable that you're going to take a slightly longer path to get to where you want to be. And that's okay.
No, I love that. And also just acknowledging it and being transparent with your manager and taking those steps.
Exactly.
And maybe particularly looking at moving from dev to a leader, that transition, was there something you wish you knew before stepping into a more of a leadership role?
I think this is something that we all kind of know. People are messy. But I think it's really only when you are in a people leader role, where you're responsible for people, that really strikes home for you, right? Because ultimately the buck starts and stops with you. Like, you are responsible for your team, you're responsible for the people in your team, and you are responsible for the value that they add to the business.
Oh, people are so different. You can't put it in the same bucket. Looking back at that time as well, was there a moment when someone else maybe saw leadership potential in you before you saw it in yourself?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. So I think for myself, and I guess a lot of other minorities as well, it's very difficult to. It's very rare that you get kind of handpicked for these leadership roles. It's kind of something that you have to ask for. But the one time in my career where I think this happened was actually my very first job at the AI startup. So the company was dependent on this one project. It was for the Department of Water to kind of keep afloat. It was 3 months away from deadline. The product that had been built to that point was not finished. It was very buggy. And I was the new kid, so I'd been there for less than a year. And my boss, the owner of the company, asked me to take over the project to see if we could get it over the line. Yeah, it was incredibly tough. It was basically 3 months of crunch, working 24/7. And I was effectively taking over from my senior. So this was an software architect with about 15 years of experience at that point. I had 2 or 3. So at the time, it felt great because it was kind of an affirmation that I am good enough. But at the same time, I kind of worked myself to the bone, and I never want to do that again.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think that's a good segue to the next question around imposter syndrome. Were there moments where you felt imposter syndrome, and how do you push through, or did you push through?
Every day. So I think if you are at the very least decent at what you do, you're going to feel like you're not good enough at some points, simply because you realize that there's this massive breadth of knowledge that you don't yet know, and that is almost impossible to work your way through. And that's okay. The way that I try to manage it is, taking moments to myself every day when I start to feel that way. You step away from whatever you're doing, just sit with your thoughts for a little bit. But most importantly, just be kind to yourself. It's very easy to, get into this negative feedback loop. And once you're in that feedback loop, it becomes very difficult to pull yourself out. And that also impacts the way that you interact with all of your teammates. And so, you try to just identify the gaps, learn from it, try to do better. But I think one of the key things that's really missing from a lot of workspaces is managing this kind of feeling becomes a lot easier if you surround yourself with empathetic people. People who understand what you're going through, people who can kind of see themselves in you and just help pull you out of the negative spiral.
Yeah, having those safe spaces to talk about those types of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there any piece of advice that really stuck with you when you stepped into leadership?
Lots. I think the most important one, or the one that stuck with me for the longest time, is this notion that reading books or consuming any kind of media about leadership gives you tools, which is absolutely needed. But you still need to practice using those tools if you want to become good at them. And I think too many leaders pride themselves in talking the talk. You've read these books and you know the principles, but they don't know how to walk the walk. As cliched as that is.
Gosh. And maybe before we move on to the next theme, is there anything else you'd like to mention looking back? I mean, I know such a career journey, but looking back on becoming from a dev to a leader, is there anything else you might want to call out for this theme?
I think something else maybe is also just finding the right mentors. So if you know fairly early on that you do like working with people, you like the operational aspects of the job, it's super important to find a mentor who is at the very least good at those things or decent at those things and is willing to support you. I think that's something that I missed for a long time. I had one leader like that early in my career, but because I was, chasing the next interesting problem, I think I only spent 2 years with him, and I should have spent more.
Do you maybe have any tips for those in the audience that want to find a mentor that maybe don't have it, maybe within their company that they're at the moment?
So OfferZen had a very cool program. I'm not sure if it's still running, but there was the mentorship program. So I think networking is incredibly important, right? So programs like that, I think, are amazing. especially for maybe the slightly more senior people, so intermediate to seniors who are looking to move into that kind of leadership space. But other than that, you just need to network. LinkedIn, for all its faults, is still the best way to meet new people in our space. And most of the people that I know of who are in senior roles, in leadership roles, they're more than willing to give of their time to help others.
Well, that's great. Cool. Moving on to theme number 2, the mess ups and the milestones. So leadership isn't about smooth sailing. There's a lot of bumps that can happen along the way. Let's start with a bit of a more positive one. What's the decision you got right, and how did you know it was the right call?
So I don't think you ever really know that the decision that you've made is the right call. But the way that I like to think about it, and the way that I like to approach new jobs is always to try to plan for growth. So you won't necessarily grow, but at the very least, you'll give yourself the best chance of making it successful, right? And so sorry, I'm just trying to set a little bit of context before I go into details. So from a product point of view, I always try to invest early in product and tech that will probably need 12 months from now, and it's the very same for people. From a people point of view, I try to identify and nudge the people who I think could form a core part of the leadership team 12 months from now, assuming that we're going to grow the business by X revenue and Y headcount. And so the way that you do that, I think, is that you need to read deeply to understand the market trends in your field, because then you can kind of combine those data points with your experience, and trust that you're making the best decision right now with the information that you have at hand. And it might not pay off in the end, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you've started the process early enough, the learnings that you take from it will set you up for the next phase. And so, that's just part of your job as a leader, is to put your head in the block. And so I think the two most recent examples of this for myself is SnapScan and Antidote. So SnapScan, for most of my time there, we kind of refocused a lot of the effort on making e-commerce and in-person card payments viable, because that would unlock new revenue streams, it would unlock new customers, allow us to eat more into the market. And at Antidote, it's been interesting because it's completely different from any of the other fields that I've had to work in. And so we're working with a lot of customers who have very sensitive IP, new games, unreleased games. And so security is a big thing for them. And so that's where we've doubled down. So we've implemented a whole bunch of new security products and features, specifically to unlock new market segments and new AAA customers. And so, that's currently what we're seeing playing out, and hoping to continue that trend.
Awesome. So to summarize, you never know if you're going to make the right call, but set yourself up well enough to make that right call within the context of what you have.
Exactly.
Love that. Maybe on the opposite side, can you maybe walk us through a time where something went wrong? What happened? How did you recover from it? And what did you learn?
Sure. So I think just in general, I think my hardest times as a leader has always been centered around people, and specifically me disappointing or not meeting the expectations of the people that depend on me. So on 2 different occasions, there's two different companies. We went through rounds of retrenchment because finding product market fit is tough. Sharing a small market with lots of other companies is extremely difficult. Unlocking funding is hard, and so sometimes you have to make impossible choices to stretch your budget. And in both of these cases, I didn't embed myself deeply enough in the financial side of the business, which meant that I was caught a little off guard. You always kind of have an idea of how things are going, but you're never 100% sure unless you are speaking to that side of the business on a regular basis. And I didn't do that, and that's my fault. And so, obviously letting go of people is tough. It's obviously not as tough as being let go. I've been on both sides of the fence, and that is far, far worse. But I guess my takeaway here is that as a leader, it is, and specifically me, it was my job to be aware of everything that was going on around my teams, anything that could potentially impact me or my teams, so that I would be able to take the necessary steps to make sure it didn't get to that point. And if it was unavoidable, that I could at least prepare myself and my teams for that. And I didn't do that. And yeah, I mean, that was tough. And it obviously has a ripple effect across the business, right? Yeah, I mean, those things compound very, very easily and very quickly.
But very important learnings made, so can only get better. Yeah. Every leader hits a wall at some point. What's been one of the toughest moments for you, and how did you navigate it?
Yes, I mean, similarly, it's always about people, right? And I think so. This specific incident, it is a little bit personal, so I'm going to try not to get into too many details. I think some of the people on the call are aware of what happened. So this was in my first role as a people manager, and this is at I think my biggest failure was that I didn't put up any boundaries. I wanted to get to know everyone. I wanted to be friends with everyone, because I thought I could smooth things over if anything bad happened. But this, unfortunately, it caused various issues over time. But ultimately, I think the root cause was that I allowed tensions and microaggressions between people within my team, between my team and other teams, to kind of just bubble under the surface. And eventually it got to the point where it threatened to completely derail 2 long-running big projects that other teams were depending on. And so obviously I started to try to remedy this way too late in the piece. But eventually what we tried was to split the one team up into smaller groups, so that, smaller groups of people who could more or less work together to try to just get these projects out of the door, so we could figure out what's next. Eventually, the 2 smaller groups delivered each of their projects, not on time and not to a level that I think anyone was particularly happy with, but it was done, and the teams could at the very least check that box. And then shortly thereafter, the team disbanded, got absorbed by other teams, which was the right choice. But in hindsight, it should never have reached that point. And I missed all of the social cues. I should have managed people. I should have picked up on those, and I should have managed people's expectations better for themselves, and as well as their relationships with other people. And honestly, I think if I had done that and, requested transfers earlier, I don't think we would have reached that point. I think people would have been happier. I think the work done would have been of a higher standard. And I think everybody would have been better off now. But unfortunately I didn't. And, it's, as a leader, I think a mistake that I made, and I think a mistake that lots of other leaders make, is not being present and not being more hands-on. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you just direct people. I think being hands-on isn't celebrated enough.
Would you say that's probably something you learned the hardest way as a leader?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's also a lesson that you really only learn once you step into that leadership role. And again, before stepping into a leadership role, especially with multiple teams, it's super important to find the right mentors and role models that you can learn from, because these are lessons that you can be exposed to, but obviously you only experience it once you're in that role.
No, 100%. And you also can't be friends with everyone.
You can't be friends with everyone.
Switching gears, maybe what is something that you're proud of getting right, and maybe what made it successful?
So having said that you can't be friends with everyone, I think you can still be friendly, and you can still be approachable. And I think that's something that I've managed to get mostly right. And, I think one of my happier takeaways from all of my previous leadership roles is the fact that while I was in those roles, I was able to, make and keep friends, while still, trying to steer and sometimes help build the ship. I've walked away from all of those roles with people that I consider friends, and I still consider friends. They're not just ex-colleagues, and I do still stalk them on LinkedIn just to make sure they're doing okay if I don't chat to them on like WhatsApp or whatever, and I'll always cheer all of their wins. I think that's the thing I'm most proud of, leading those particular roles.
Solid tribe around you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Now I think we can look ahead a little bit with theme 3, building and leading for the future. So as a leader, you're not just solving for today's challenges, you're also building for what's coming. In this final theme, I want to explore a little bit how you maybe led through uncertainty, bringing your team with you and preparing for the future of tech leadership. Not daunting at all. Maybe starting with, how do you help your team navigate uncertainty or rapid change?
Yeah. For whatever reason, I've worked at startups probably for the last 12 years now. So there's always uncertainty and there's always lots of change. And I think the skill that stands out for me the most here is being able to share context. Context is king. Everybody will make the right decisions and move in the same direction if they understand the why and the constraints that you're working within. And so my MO is always just to collect as much information as I can and then socialize all of my thinking. And I encourage all of my team members and all of my peers to do exactly the same. There's very few cases where information shouldn't be shared or information is too sensitive to be shared.
Maybe just a follow-up question to that. How do you balance, for example, in very intense times, not causing mass panic, but also making sure everyone's got the same line of sight to make those critical decisions, understanding the implications?
It's incredibly hard to do because someone is going to get spooked regardless of what you do. The rumor mill works overtime when there's lots of change. So again, I try to be as forthright as possible about everything. If the company's not in a great space, I will say the company's not in a great space, but I will also make sure that that I share data points that points to how we can fix things. And I also hope that, through my actions in the period leading up to those chats, that the team will be able to see that, there is light at the end of the tunnel and there is a way to get past this.
Makes sense, yeah. What would you say is your leadership North Star, kind of that one principle that guides all of the decisions you make?
So again, just to set the scene, so a lot of people that I've worked with in the last 12 years or so probably don't know me as a really good dev and software architect, simply because sometimes I wasn't able to show up and perform to the level that I know I can, and that might be due to the environment, it might be due to personal circumstances, and so it's important to always understand and always remember that you don't always know what's going on with the people around you, even if it's somebody that is a direct report, and even if you might have the best rapport with them. And so my overruling, my guiding principle really is just to be kind. Treat others like you would want them to treat you.
Unfortunately, not everyone operates in the same way. How do you take your team along that journey with you to prioritize just being kind?
So I think it's important so whenever I start a new job or join a new team, I spend the first few months just getting to know people and making sure that I show people how I operate, and that's always from a place of empathy. And then in building those relationships and building that trust, I hope that I hope that I make everyone else realize that it's okay to do the same. And so I firmly believe that if you give people the freedom to just be themselves and show up in the way that they feel comfortable, you'll get the best from them.
What's a skill or mindset every future tech leader should master, in your opinion?
So this might be a bit controversial. And again, it depends on where you are. So it depends on context, right? But I think that leaders need to get their hands dirty. If somebody is reporting to you, I think you should have the skills to be able to do their job. Might not be the skills and might not be at the same level as your direct reports, but you should understand like what they do on a daily basis, because you need to mentor them. And if you don't know what they're doing, or don't know how they're doing their job, you cannot mentor them. It's impossible. And it becomes even more important when you start to grow the org, or you join a much bigger org, where you start to have things like skip level catch-ups, where it's not a direct report, and yet they still need a mentor. And for you to be that mentor, you need to be able to relate to the person, not just on a personal level, but on a technical level as well.
So a lot of audience reactions. I think there's a lot.
Not as controversial as I thought. Okay.
No, I think there's a lot of agreement in the room. Maybe speaking about unconventional a little bit, is there an unconventional leadership tactic that's worked for you?
So it's something that works for me. I don't know if it always works for my peers or the people that I interact with, but I'm extremely nosy. So specifically, the experiences that I mentioned earlier, being caught off guard. I've nosy to the point where I want to know what's happening in every single team throughout the company, regardless of whether or not the team interacts with the teams that I lead. And this is important, I think, because there's so many unknowns, and you have so many blind spots that you don't know about, that the only way I think that you can be effective at managing the present and also be able to plan for the future is if you are nosy. Ask questions. Have the, what do they call it, donut meetings or whatever. All the coffee catch-ups. Have those things, because that's the only way that you get to know more about what's happening across the business and what could potentially impact your teams.
So get your hands dirty and be nosy. That's kind of a good takeaway. Love it. Okay, cool. I'm keen to dive into audience questions because we actually have quite a few, and I'm worried that we might not have enough time. I'm going to pull them onto the screen now. Reminder to audience, if you want to pop any more questions, you can. You can also upvote if there's any particular questions that you're like +1. I also want an answer to this. Let's start with Bernard. Top 3 tips for building a high-performing and thriving dev team.
Top 3 tips. Geez. Right. So I think 2 of them were covered in what we spoke about earlier. So the one is being empathetic, allowing people to show up as their best selves. Number 2 is making sure that your teams have all the context that they need. So always have open dialogues and just a constant stream of information going into your team. And the third one, I think, is, and this might be counterintuitive, but having some process. So I'm not saying you need to go full agile, full scrum, but some process that just helps to shape the thinking of the team. So not to kind of give them a blueprint for how they tackle challenging problems.
Love that. Okay, cool. Next one. Just going to run through all of them as much as we can. Tabang asks, how would you suggest leaders hold themselves accountable to practicing these lessons instead of defaulting to learned, typical, ineffective behaviors?
So I do think it's extremely difficult to hold yourself accountable because often you're not just looking after process and things. And so I think it's important that the leadership team as a whole holds themselves holds each other accountable. And again, I think the only way that that happens is if everyone in that team is nosy, because you need to care about what the other teams are doing. I don't know how individuals hold themselves accountable. I'm not quite sure that that's ever going to be effective, to be honest. Unless you are very self-realized and yeah, you are, and unless it becomes like part of your daily ritual as well. But very few people do that.
But I think it also, as you've said already, it's your tribe. So the people around you that can call out these things, they can also keep you accountable. But also your team, if you're creating those spaces of transparency, like they also can call you out, which is great.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, there's two-part question to Steve-O. Does a CTO have to know how to do every role they lead, or rely on experts in the team to advise? And then number two, is a 70% match to a CTO job description enough to apply for the position? Okay, so two different ones. Let's start with question number one.
So this is a very difficult one, right? Because I don't think you can be dogmatic about the need to know everything. I think it's also contextual, because the CTO role, like a CTO is not a CTO is not a CTO, right? Or CTO is a CTO is a CTO, right? It's going to be different at every single company. At some companies, the CTO is purely technical. So they're looking after the architecture and infrastructure, that very high level view of those things. Whereas at a startup or a scale up, you're doing everything. You're doing everything from product to support to dev to DevOps to SecOps. So it really does depend. I like to be able to do everything that my direct reports can, because I want to be able to help them and guide them. And again, it depends on the size of your team, right? Because if you have the capacity to grow leadership roles within your team, fantastic. But even then, you should be able to do what your leaders can do. And for the second one, again, I think it depends on the context, right? Like, what does 70% mean in this case? If you are a highly technical person and have a little bit of people management experience, you might be a good fit for a CTO, a highly technical CTO role. But if it also requires, like if it's some hybrid CPTO role where you actually need to look after product as well, you have no product experience, then I would say 70% match isn't a great option there. So again, it depends on the context.
Okay. Maybe we can suggest if they want to maybe reach out to you with a little bit more context.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, next one. What ratio would you recommend amount of team members reporting in order to make sufficient time for individuals?
Yeah, this is a classic problem of especially scale-ups. I don't have a good answer yet, other than to say if you're spending more than half of your week in meetings, and more specifically like catch-ups, that's too many. In my experience, I've run the gamut from, looking after a team of 4 developers to looking after, 40 people across like 3 departments. Again, there are many other people on this call, I'm sure, who've led much bigger teams. But for me, the sweet spot was kind of looking after maybe 8 direct reports. So that might be, 8 managers, each having their team of maybe 4 to 8 people. Anything more than that, and you tend to spend most of your time, preparing one-on-ones, preparing plans, coming out of your one-on-ones, having one-on-ones, which leaves you very little time to do anything else, And again, the key point of, I think, being a leader is that you are nosy, and you also get your hands dirty. And if you're just spending your time in one-on-ones, you cannot do either of the other 2 things.
100%. Okay, cool. Next up, how would you ask for a leadership role if there is already a lead filling that position or no new projects to lead? In this case, would you recommend to look up new companies that have leadership roles?
It depends. So for what it's worth, my first leadership role, first official leadership role was at Jumo. and there was already a manager in place. He was my manager. I think it's important to understand if the leader has capacity to, or is at capacity or near capacity, because then it might make sense to, throw your hat in the ring and say, well, why don't I take over these responsibilities from you to free you up to do these other things that you cannot get to at the moment. So even if there is already a lead in place, there might still be space for you as well. Again, if you don't ask, you'll never know. And if it's a company where you are happy, where you're learning and you're growing, it probably doesn't make sense to just jump to a new company just because you want to get into a leadership role. Yeah. So my advice would be to just ask first, and, broach the subject and see what they can do about
it. Awesome. Okay. Where do you go to follow and read about industry trends?
Everywhere. No, so I subscribe to a lot of blogs. So if you aren't currently subscribed to the Pragmatic Engineer, you should. So that's I forget the guy's name. But he was like ex-Uber, ex-Facebook. He did some consulting for a while, ex-Airbnb, I think, as well. But he has an in with all of the major companies across the world. And he always broaches very interesting and difficult subjects within the tech space. It costs some money, but it's well worth it. And then other than that, there's tons of free content on YouTube, specifically from like the go-to conferences, NDC. They have fantastic speakers on there, again, talking about really, really interesting and difficult subjects. So there's a lot of free content out there.
Awesome. Yeah, I dropped the link in the chat if anyone wants to check it out, to the Pragmatic Engineer. Okay, next one. Oh, we've got a lot of questions. How do you build and maintain a culture of technical excellence with your teams?
That's also a very difficult one. I think there's kind of two problems that you need to solve, right? So the first one is, how do you find people to join your team who care about this? And then how do you retain them? And so you kind of need to solve both problems, because you can't, if you just inherit a team that doesn't really care about this, I don't know that you'll ever get them to the point where they do care about it. So you kind of need, I think you need to solve both of those problems. So the one is finding the right talent who will care about it. And then I think from a how do you retain them problem is to, as a leader, we have a number of tools that we can apply here, right? The one is making sure that the team has enough space to do things mostly right. There's a lot of companies out there pride themselves on being customer centric when really they're just feature factories. You kind of get told, these are the things we need to build, go and build it. These are the timelines you have. In that case, like if you're in a situation like that, it's important that you as a leader give your team the space to be able to, craft the best experience within those timeframes by, pushing back on the things that will lead to like lower quality output. But yeah, that's also extremely difficult to maintain, especially over the long term.
Thanks. I think we'll maybe do one or two more questions, and then we can dive into our rapid fire ones to end off. What are the metrics you focused on at different companies as one, a manager, two, a CTO, that correlated to the success on the goals of the company at the time?
Yeah, so very, very different roles, again, depending on where you are. As a manager, the main metrics that I looked at was kind of, is my team happy? Are the individuals within my team happy? Is my team happy as a whole? And are they meeting deadlines? So again, it's nothing technical in any of those metrics. This is really just focused on people. Whereas in the CTO role, it was more about, is the company, so is the team growing as it should? So, are we hiring the right people? Are we retaining them? But there was also more of a focus on, are we meeting, the headline metrics every quarter? Are we meeting our revenue targets? Are we meeting, the roadmap deliverables? So very much a combination of the people, the people metrics as well as company metrics.
Okay, last audience question. What is a leadership perspective or principle that you've previously held closely that has since changed, and why did it change?
I guess it's something that I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, which was that I thought I didn't like working with people, and I really just wanted to, I just wanted to code. And I thought that managers were the opposite. They had to really like people and not want to get their hands dirty. And that's obviously, well, in my experience, that's just not true. There's lots of overlap between the two. And so that's definitely changed. I think developers should learn to love working with people, and I think managers should also keep loving to get their hands dirty in code or design, whatever field you're managing.
Awesome. Okay, cool. I think we can end with our rapid fire off questions. That's only 3 of them. Maybe it's kind of linking to what you just answered, but what is one leadership myth you wish people would stop believing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's exactly that, right? I think when I actually moved into the role at Jumo, my manager told me, you're probably going to have to give up being technical. You're going to have to just focus on people. And I don't think that's true. At least I don't think it's true anymore. I think you can do everything, but then you also need to understand and be comfortable with how thin you're going to spread yourself.
Okay, 3 books or resources that have shaped your leadership style.
So the 3 that I mentioned previously, so Pragmatic Engineer, the Ghost Fund, the NDC conferences. I just don't get time to read books unless it's with my son.
Nothing wrong with that. What's a quote or mantra you keep coming back to?
So this is something that my dad told me when I was probably about 10 years old. And it's been my MO ever since. And he said, you can move mountains. You only need to know where to push.
Oh, I love that. Okay. I'm going to copy that. I'm stealing that. Amazing. We're at the end of our Q&A session. I kind of don't want it to end because I feel like there's been so many nuggets of wisdom dropped today. But again, audience, the recording will be available if you want to repeat and watch it again. If you'd also like to join one of our upcoming events, there will be a poll on the screen where we'll be tackling myth busting as well as speaking to a few other tech leaders over the next few weeks. Kurt, I just want to say thank you again for sharing your journey, your insights, and the lessons you've learned along the way. I really do think we're all walking away with some great insights and also some interesting inspiration to really apply to our own leadership journeys and where we want to go in our careers. So thank you very much. And yeah, thank you again to our audience for joining. We hope you enjoyed the session and we'll see you at a future event. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Bye.